This is Dr. Charles Parker, and you're listening to Core Brain Journal. It's a place where I connect both fresh discoveries and interesting different perspectives from advanced mind science with the realities of real people and everyday life down on Main Street. Well, welcome, folks. Dr. Charles Parker here one more time at Core Brain Journal, and we have a very interesting, I've mentioned Korsivsky before, and Dr. Ransom Stevens is really right in line with Alfred Korsivsky. And he is a very interesting guy. We're looking forward to hear Ransom talk about his new book. Ransom, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Dr. Parker.
So I'm going to read a bio here and get us started, and then we'll go from there. Ransom Stevens, Petaluma, California, is a physicist, science writer, and novelist, and he's written hundreds of articles on subjects ranging from neuroscience to quantum physics to parenting teenagers. His new book, and this is what we're really going to spend some time talking about, The Left Brain Speaks, but the Right Brain Laughs. And the subtitle is A Look at Neuroscience, at the Neuroscience of Innovation and Creativity in Science and Life. Oh, Art, Science, and Life. I couldn't read my own writing. Sorry about that. I was put the subtitle down. So he has two other books, which are novels, The God Patent and The Sensory Deception, on accurate, digestible science to investigate complex social issues like the science-religion culture war, environmentalism and technology, plutocracy and anarchy, the polarities that we see all the time as we saw them in our last election. So, Ransom, so tell us a little bit about yourself personally, if you will, please.
Well, as you said, I'm a physicist. My background is in experimental physics. I was in research for a long time, and then I left and got onto the high-tech bandwagon. And about 12 years ago, I decided I'd start my own company in pursuit of becoming a writer. So now for the last 12 years, I've managed to make the mortgage as a writer. And so this is, The Left Brain Speaks, the Right Brain Laughs is my new book. I have the two other novels you mentioned, but I get by writing mostly for in the electronics industry. Some, the higher paying gigs tend to be for me. It's kind of physics for engineers. But the really fascinating things, right now, neuroscience, I just got really into it and then managed to stumble my way into a book deal. So it's a rush.
Oh, good for you. So you do a lot of presentations then. You're speaking all around the globe, I understand.
Yeah. My mother was a speech major at University of California, and she taught me early on. So it's something that's been very helpful for me in all of the careers I've had. And so I give speeches on science topics. I do a lot of speaking at science cafes, and I have a bunch of courses that I charge a lot for and manage to make the mortgage and for electrical engineers. A couple like this, I have a variety of talks based on neuroscience on topics like neuroscience of innovation, which is something I find very fascinating, but also on the essential weirdness of death, the depth of our interdependence, and sundry topics like that. One that's kind of cool is the notion that consciousness could be a continuum instead of, or in addition to, a complexity threshold.
Say that one again. That's a very interesting. I just dove off the cliff on that one with you.
Yeah, it's a mouthful, huh? It really is. So
very, very interesting.
So here's the idea. The current thinking on consciousness about which animals have different levels of consciousness is that there is a complexity, a point where there is so much going on among the neurons in a brain that consciousness emerges. Right? Emergence is a phenomenon where things happen like swarming behavior among birds, the swallows with their swarms. It's something that prior to having really powerful computers was very difficult to understand. Now it can be modeled. So the thinking is that consciousness emerges from when there's a certain level of complexity within the brain. So that's the thinking. But there is a group of neuroscientists, Christoph Koch being one of them, who's an old physicist, and the thinking there is that you might be able to calculate what's called the integrated information, and that is would be an actual measure of how much the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And if that works out, then you could calculate this integrated information for any system. And then it might be that there is a continuum of consciousness, so that, from something like that is totally, essentially alien to us in terms of consciousness, like a plant, all the way up to humans or sperm whales or whatever turns out to be the most conscious and self-aware of all the animals. It could be, a continuum where they're all conscious at some level, and certainly, they're all sentient. They all respond to external stimulus. Mm-hmm. The trees respond to light and water, and all the animals respond to those basic things. But do they whine? Do they complain? Do they tell jokes? There's those higher levels of consciousness too. So that's one of the that was one of the things that just blew my mind when I was researching this book. So for me, writing this book was really just kind of one blowing of the mind after the other, and hopefully I was able to record them in a way that's at once amusing and useful for people.
Well, I think the fact that you were thinking about us novitiates in this regard, that you were thinking you're going to bring it down to a level that we could really appreciate it, and all the things that you have in the book are really kind of simplified and metaphoric, so we can actually grasp what you're talking about.
Well, this is one of the things that the publisher said when she asked me to write this book. And I pushed back saying, well, I'm a physicist. What am I doing writing a neuroscience book? And her response was, well, you're a science writer. You can write about any science. And I hemmed and hawed, thinking to myself, oh, my God, I'm blowing this great opportunity. And she stopped me. And she said, but think about it. How much harder would it be for you to write a book for lay people on physics? You'd have to you'd have to express everything in a language that you haven't been using to describe it. But with neuroscience, I don't know the language, right? I actually have flashcards for the different neuroscience terms, the amygdala, the hippocampus, all of this jargon, the sulci and the gyri, all these things. I don't know them. So for me to understand it, I need to understand it in normal language. And, one thing that drives me crazy in science writing is this notion. A lot of science writers kind of throw out a ton of vocabulary and then describe a complex process in this language that you just learned, if you manage to sit that far through the book or the essay. I have no time for that. We're in it to learn and enjoy ourselves. You already speak a language. If I can't explain it in your language, then what am I doing?
Randy,
so wisecracks.
We're on such the same path. I mean, that's why I'm doing Core Brain Journal, because we need to get individuals like yourself to come in and really put it down in a way that really the public can get it. I mean, it's a type of journalism. It's a democratization of neuroscience, and really get it right down so people can use it. If you don't understand, if you're stuck in language barriers, you can't live it. You can't realize it.
Right. Plus it's annoying.
Yeah. And you feel put down when somebody's whipping the words on you. Absolutely. So true. So tell us a little bit about the left brain and the right brain and how that works, because a lot of our audience doesn't know about those two functional sides and what they do together and how that works.
So most people are probably, aware of what's become a cliche, that the left brain is your inner accountant and your right brain is your inner artist. And this emerged from research done in the 60s that showed that there were impulses from the right brain that were being inhibited by the left brain, and that when they weren't inhibited, creativity increased. Things like the ability to draw and sketch and simple artistic abilities. So there's a germ of truth to that, but it's a giant oversimplification. And so it's time for a new oversimplification. And the new oversimplification, well, in terms of the title of my book, goes something like this. the left brain tells the joke, the right brain gets the joke. So the left brain speaks, the right brain laughs. But there's a bit of a postscript there that, you know, doesn't make for as marketable a title. It should be the left brain tells the joke, the right brain gets the joke, and the left brain actually does the laughing.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that's a little bit on the spaghetti brains, but
yeah.
I do get what you're talking about. You know, it's interesting because I was thinking about how humorous it is when you're really thinking that way. You're reminding me of conversations I've had with Dr. Edward de Bono. I don't know if you're familiar with de Bono because he's a strong player in creativity and has written some really excellent books on the practical side of creatively understanding the world we live in, like Six Thinking Hats.
Right. Yeah, I have a book. I just looked at my bookshelf. I have one of his books right there.
Yeah, I mean, he's a great guy, and I had the chance to work with him years ago. It was an unusual opportunity, and I hung out with him for a day down in Dallas, Texas, when he was doing a consult at H. Ross Perot's old company. And it was just so much fun to see him in action because he's got the sense of humor that you have, and he's got the surpassing intelligence like you have. And he put these together, not in quite the same picturesque way that you have, but he's an interesting guy to know. So how does it happen that do you actually take us down in the book where we can synchronize those activities, or where does the book take us? Where are we going to go?
So the things that I was most interested in really it boils down to this. The underlying theme is about feedback loops. And each chapter of this book is a pair of things that we tend to think of as separate, but we know are intimately related. The first chapter is you and me. The second is animals and people. And it builds up. And one of them that I really like, just fascinated by, is talent and skill. Trying to distinguish these two things, good luck. There are a few cases where you can really do it. But for the most part, you can't tell where one ends and the next begins. But we talk about them as if you could. And that goes on to, of course, analysis and creativity. And it all builds up to art and science and what we value. One thing, as a novelist that I have always been at once intrigued by and annoyed by is that, a lot of literary critics just can't stand bestsellers. Right? It isn't the best music, top 40 music. Well, I don't really like a whole lot of top 40 music. I know what I like. I don't really need to know what critics think I should like, and I don't need to know what sells. But, I can't read every book. I can't listen to every song. It helps to have critics. So why is it that, some people like some things and other people like other things, but there are a lot of things that a lot of us like? And so this is what I wanted to figure out, the roots of value. And that brought me to neuroaesthetics. And so that was something that just fascinated the hell out of me. And within that is how to create and innovation. And that goes to, I don't think of this as a self-help book, but I learned a lot of things about how to crank up your ability to innovate, your innovative engine, that are practical and useful. Still, I deny that it's a self-help book. I do.
It's a little bit platitudinous if it's a self-help book.
Well, it's not that I don't want to hang out with those guys. Every self-help book I've ever read, I've found something useful in, right? Yes. So I'm not downgrading the genre. Mm-hmm. It's just not really what I set out to do. But, anytime you read anything, hopefully it helps you one way or another.
Well, what you're talking about is so wonderful, really. It's just beautiful the way you're putting it together, and it's so interesting because all of us would like to grow our lives one way or another, and we're either dead in the water out there behind the mules in the field, or we're starting to think about what we're going to do next in some creative, productive way. And you're talking about a path. You're talking about a path that, as you said a moment ago, all of us live on to some degree. And if we could enhance it and grow it and actually live it better, it sounds like it's going to be so much fun really getting into your book and digesting it.
Well, I hope so. Yeah, there's a lot of really interesting things. I've been trying to make sense. You mentioned the election, and so there are a lot of obvious oversights that among the media, among everyone really. I don't know anybody who called this the results that we had, regardless of whether they're happy with them or whether they're not happy with them. But we clearly have some blind spots in the process, and I think that falls into what I refer to as idea prejudice. In the left brain speaks, the right brain laughs, and that stems from basically the way our brains work. We can develop kind of a simple, albeit oversimplified, model for how our brains work. We recognize patterns. We build up a pattern of expectation. We recognize events in the past that give us context in the present that allows us to predict the future, the very immediate future as well as a longer term future. But sometimes our tendency to categorize puts things in the wrong piles, in the wrong files, and we just completely miss and overlook possibilities and make mistakes, big glaring mistakes.
Pattern recognition does take place. So we see it happen so much in terms of this whole business, as I was talking to you about offline before, reductionistic thinking. Because if you're finding a pattern, you have to necessarily, I would think, and I'd be interested in your thoughts about this, move away from some of the pieces that are a part of the puzzle, so that then the proclivity would be to actually get down and actually think too reductionistically. And but apparently from the way the election went, there are a lot of people thinking reductionistically in some constructive way. In their opinion, I'm going to be reductionistic this way.
So
I was on. Yeah, what do you think? Go ahead.
Well, reductionism gets a bad rap because it seems kind of stupid. Why would you take a big, complicated, interrelated system and break it into pieces instead of trying to appreciate the whole thing at once? Well, it's because we're kind of stupid. We're not as smart as we'd like to be. Big, complicated systems are really not intelligible to our brains. We have to break them down. Reductionism is extraordinarily successful, but it can take you down the wrong path. So the trick is to balance it, to balance the reduction of the inconceivable with an understanding of how the pieces put together. Hopefully, right, the goal of reductionism is that you can break something down into pieces that you can understand, then put it back together and understand the whole. So, any technique that you can come up with to help at either end is a useful one. I think, mathematics, especially in physics, mathematics is a tremendous tool to assemble complex systems from their pieces and develop a theory that can be very predictive and also describe, big chunks of the whole, if not the whole thing, and approach that capital T truth, if not hit it.
Ransom, I just love the interplay, the way you're talking about it there, because it's such an excellent point that you raised. And all of us, that's where art comes in. That's where creativity does come in, because that metaphoric whole at the end, that metaphoric opportunity where it all comes back together in some way that a person can appreciate it more effectively. I'm sure that's where you're going with your subject matter. Well, yeah. The notion of how different science and art are, yet how similar the pursuit of each is in terms of creativity. You can't discover something that's new without being extraordinarily creative, and certainly art is all about creating new things. But the goals are so different. Science, on the one hand, is pursuing something, hoping for something totally objective, right? That's the goal, to describe nature in a way that is independent of the human mind. And on the other hand, art is kind of the opposite. In art, we want to share. We want to be able to subject what the artist feels to the beholder.
something that is, in some sense, extraordinarily subjective. So I want to, an artist wants to share their subjective sense of the world with the beholder, and the scientist kind of wants to do the opposite and come up with a view of the world that is wholly objective. But at the same time, a lot of the tools are doing the work is very similar. You have to invent things. You have to come up with ideas. You have to innovate. And so in that sense, they're kind of the same thing.
Well, and then to take that one step further is to apply the innovation to actual communication so that it works effectively, because it could all be in your head or it could be in the society that you're in. And there's where the actual metaphor comes together, because language is very often imprecise and more metaphoric.
That's right. And that takes us to value. Why do we pursue some science topics with great zest and not others? Why do people value some works of art and not others? If they're truly subjective, I mean, I like to use the example of, what's your favorite color?
Blue.
See, wrong. The best colors are silver and black. They go perfectly together. Right? It's that silly that, what's your favorite book? Well, I like this book, The Harp and the Blade. If I had to be nailed down, my favorite book is this book, The Harp and the Blade by John Myers. No one has ever heard of it. It's been out of print for 40 years.
I'm writing it down right now.
Oh, it's a great romp. It's a fantasy in the set in medieval times with a minstrel who has a moral quandary. You can't beat that.
Fantastic. Yeah, well, you and I were talking about the Korsivsky thing, and I think that everything you're talking about is going to wrap that very much up in that particular book. You're going to love it. So what's the practical application to take it down to where can listeners, how would you say they could use their book in their own lives? What's the next step? So we've got the large picture of where you're going in terms of putting things together. I love the idea of value and the way you're thinking about the whole concept of idea of prejudice and value. It's a very interesting concept. How does a person then take some of these neuroscience principles that you're talking about? Can they translate it? Is the book a book of here's how you can use this in your life kind of thing?
Well, it has that aspect. Yeah, there is, and that aspect is approached particularly to help people charge up their innovative engine and to solve bigger problems, to be able to access insights. And I'll say a little bit about that in a minute. But before that, I just want to, I'm one of those rare people who reads manuals. And manuals are extraordinarily useful thing. And when you understand how some equipment works, you can put it to work better. And so that's personally my selfishness, and what I was really trying to do in researching this book was to understand the brain better so I could use mine better. So just understanding, the origins of why we value some things more than others, well, it helps you create value in your job, in your hobbies, and when you have a brilliant idea, to sell it. Ultimately, we do have to convince others that something has value, and understanding where, how their brains process things to determine that silver and black is superior to blue, for example. It helps just to know that. But to specifics, there is a sequence that you can perform that will help you solve challenges. Whether it's coming up with a great metaphor in a novel, whether it's coming up with the right colors or the right themes for a painting, or solving a technical problem or even a bureaucratic problem, that there are techniques that you can use that will cause your insight bulb to go on, light that aha moment and give that to you. And it's a mix of focus and defocus. And what it really does, though, going back to reductionism, is that it balances. It gives you some tools for how to balance our need to reduce things to understandable bits, but then to reassemble them into a whole.
You're blowing my mind just talking about it. I'm like,
Yeah.
I'm down the path with you, and I'm so much looking forward to getting into that part of the book. I think so many of our listeners would be too, because it has such a practical value to be thinking about that way. Because if you think of any problem in your life, that's really what it's all about, and you can almost sit down and write it out based on what you're talking about.
Right. So let me just explain it, give you the seeds of it. The details, take some, there's a reason the book's 230 pages long, but let me give you some hints to it. And let's start with this. Where do you have your greatest ideas? Where are you most likely to be when you say aha, or have that light bulb moment?
Mine's in the morning when I'm writing. For me, you're asking me a question. I'll tell you, I get up at 4 o'clock and I get into things for about 2 hours there, and no stimulation, no other thing. Just this is where I need to go next.
Wow. All right. So here's the model. Here's the idea. And of course, it's a model for approaching challenge. I don't have all the answers, so let's just dispel that right out the gate. And I don't want to false advertise or anything. But here's the approach. If you are working on solving a problem, any old challenge, whatever it might be, the first thing is to focus on it really hard, and to acquire as much as to study all of your notes, to read as many of the papers on it as you can, to research it. And the idea is to fill your mind, to fill your brain with as much information about this problem as you can, and to do it without really worrying about the solution. Just get the information in there, all right? Now, when you do that, what you're really doing is priming the rest of your brain to put the pieces together, to solve the puzzle. And priming is an aspect of, it's something that we're all familiar with. If you're driving to work and you're going to get in the off-ramp, and you put on your blinker and the person behind you slows down, lets you in, smooth sailing, you're likely to be more pleasant when you get there and you're pouring your coffee and talking to people. If they cut you off and you have to go to the next off-ramp and come back, you're not going to be as pleasant. You're not primed to be nice, right? So by acquiring all the information and getting it into your brain, you're priming your brain to solve whatever that problem is. Now, the heart of this argument, the neuroscience behind it, is really simple, and it goes like this. When you look at something, say you're looking at a child, your child in particular, then when you look at that person that is your child, somebody you have a tremendous amount of affection invested in, well, you're not really aware of processing the light that's reflected from them into an image of them, or processing the sound that hits, that's oscillating your eardrum and turning that into a voice, or picking up whatever scent they might have, if they just were exercising or they're right out of the shower. You're not conscious of any of that. The vast majority of the work that your brain does is below conscious level. The metaphor I like is that there's so much going on, these sort of bottom-up boilers, that there's all these processes going on that are not conscious, that there's this sort of unitary top-down consciousness that is aware, that is only aware of a few of these things that boil up from the senses, the complete image of your child and all the feelings that come with that. Now, that top-down unitary consciousness, what we think of when we think of ourselves and what we're aware of, now we're only capable of having like 3 to 7, maybe 10 separate concepts in mind at once. But there's millions of potential thoughts bouncing around in your head. So, getting back now, so you've analyzed the problem. You've assembled all the information that you have access to into your brain. The next step is to get the hell out of the office. Go away and relax. Be quiet. Because what you consciously do is you will be prejudiced against certain ideas, and you'll inhibit your own creativity, your own ability to innovate if you keep pounding away on the problem. What you need to do is let your brain put the pieces together, just like they put the pieces together when you see your child. All that information has to come together and create your feeling and your image, the whole thing that is your kid to you. Now you need your brain to just go to work and make those lateral connections. And so the next part is to defocus just as hard as you focused. So you focus on all the information and you try to do it without worrying about the solution. Just trust it's going to happen. Then go away and don't think about it. Meditation is an extraordinarily useful way to quiet your brain and get away from it. But I like to yell obscenities at Oakland Raiders games. I like to hang around bars. I like heavy metal concerts. And those are good ways to get away from it too. I've been there's many times I've been standing, right up against the stage, banging my head to some rocker, and then pulled my notebook out of my back pocket because, dang, if I don't have an idea, a patentable idea for some silly technology some dumb company's paying me to work on, right? Mm-hmm. That's, most people get their great ideas in the shower. I mean, I haven't even thought about moving my desk into the shower because I get so much productivity in there. The computer gets wet. It could be a problem.
I can see it now.
So that's this basic model of acquiring the information, letting your brain do its job. And then the tricky part has to do with experience and expertise. Two words that clearly are, kind of the same. Being an expert means having experience. But there's a downside to being an expert. And that is that, yes, you know this subject and you know what won't work. So if an idea comes up that won't work on that subject, you throw it out. And we throw them out. We throw out ideas before they even get to consciousness. So we're throwing stuff out. That's what idea prejudice is. We overlook things even before they make it to consciousness. And then, a lot of them make it to consciousness, and it's just, it's just a bad idea. You throw it out. You don't even entertain it. But to innovate, to create, you kind of need to shut that off, because all of your experience, all that expertise makes you an expert in a very narrow canyon in a great big world. And so to see something new, you kind of need to scale the walls of the canyon to get to the top and see the whole world out there. And to do that, well, you need to shut off all that prejudice, be quiet, and then now that your brain has had some time to put the pieces together, to sit quietly and let the ideas percolate up. And don't judge them. Don't write them down. Just listen. Just listen to yourself. Now, this is, of course, a concept that we can generalize to groups of people and to work effectively together, too. All these things, can generalize. So we have to be careful with that because, we're not bees. Maybe we do have some hive consciousness, but I'm not aware of it. So I'm not sure each bee is aware of any hive consciousness that they might have either.
Yep. So true.
But once you're quiet for a while and you just let the ideas come, just let them come. Do not judge them. Now it's time to go back and dig back into that overworked Western world, cog in the machine and start analyzing them, because a lot of your ideas are going to suck. But the main thing is to have them, because they aren't all going to suck. And some of them that seem like they might be dumb, well, this might just be stupid enough to work. So this is something that is it is a key to lateral thought. And it's not, this isn't, I didn't invent this. I formulated it in a way that I'm not aware of it having been formulated before. And I formulated it the way a physicist looks at the world. So there's that sense of being a trained problem solver that I bring to it. But it's it's not. I certainly wouldn't claim that it's original work. But it is useful. I have solved a lot of problems, and it is the best thing about it is in the West. I don't know about anywhere else. I've only worked in the West, but here where we work, there's a lot of focus on hard work. And I like to work hard, but I like to goof off too. And what I've learned from writing this book is that goofing off is a key component to hard work. That if you don't get away from it and cool off, then you're just not as effective. And it's not like the 7 habits of highly effective people where you're sharpening the saw. That's certainly part of it. But it's more this process of priming your brain with all that information, then quieting it, and then listening to it without being prejudiced, taking the ideas aside, and then being prejudiced, then throwing out the bad ones. Or more likely, a lot of the bad ideas you have, a lot of the ideas that don't work for this challenge may well work for another one that you're going to come across later. So they're all worth recording, but only a few are going to solve the problem that you face right now. But the odds are really good that you'll have those insights. So there you go. That's the one part of the utilitarian value of the left brain speaks, the right brain laughs, this kind of model for innovation.
Well, I thank you so much for just starting the conversation with that synchrony between the brain sides, the halves of the brain, because as you went through that series, that sequence, it helped me picture it, going from left to right to back to left again. You said that, and that's basically what you outlined again. And then you said after you get back on the left side, sort it out so that it has, and you used a great word there, utilitarian value, because that's putting that set of thoughts into the reality of everyday life. And I just think it was a great, just a super narrative, really, of what you put together there. It's a very easy way to think about it. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much. I hope it's useful. As I say in the left brain speaks, the right brain laughs. Best case scenario, we get a new perspective, acquire some tools that'll make us better people. Worst case scenario, we have a few laughs.
I think that's going to happen. Listen, Dr. Ransom Stevens, thank you so much. The time's run by here a little bit. We could talk for a long time. I've really enjoyed speaking with you. So let's give our listeners a place they can go to, your website. We're going to have the book, and we're going to have all 3 books up there on the show notes. But go ahead and give us your website here, since some of them are driving while we're talking.
All right. Well, my website is ransomstevens.com. My first name is Ransom, as in kidnapping. It's a family name. I was told, my parents told me that it was Irish. I go to Ireland, I ask around, no one's ever heard of it. So it's a California name, I guess. Ransom, R-A-N-S-O-M, and Stevens, S-T-E-P-H-E-N-S. So ransomstevens.com is my website. My page on Amazon has a lot of information too. My website is kind of huge. And so there's far more there than you ever wanted to know about me. But there's also some kind of interesting things, some sort of silly videos and stuff to goof around with, some comments about, the Oakland Raiders.
I'm looking forward to going over there. I haven't been over there, to tell you the truth. I was so involved with I summarized your book. I was looking at some of the reviews of your book and getting prepared for it. But, we're definitely on the same path, and I appreciate your contribution. Our audience, I'm sure, is going to be very, very pleased with this. It's a great conversation, some very interesting insights. Appreciate it. So
well, thanks for having me on.
We hope to do it again sometime. Really, we have to find that next piece to talk about. Really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to Core Brain Journal. We're working every day behind the scenes to bring you reports that connect research benches with those street trenches. Here we share the complexity of mind science because, as you know, details really do matter. One of the most pervasive, misunderstood challenges is how commonplace medications, like those written for ADHD, are used so regularly without clear guidelines. If you think you'd like more specifics, take a minute to download my 2-page PDF packed with video links and references on the absolute essentials of how to start ADHD medications. They're easily available at corebrainjournal.com/start. Thanks for listening. Do connect and stay tuned. Together we can make a difference.